Okay, hello everybody. Welcome. Thank you for waiting. We were trying to figure out how to stream to YouTube, so I think we've got it figured out. So, hello to those of you who might be watching from YouTube. It's wonderful to be here with everybody. This almost didn't happen again. I've been having a little bit of a rough week, I'm not gonna lie. I was out of town. I think some of you saw online that I was in Toronto for a segment with CTV or Morning. And then I went to speak at a conference in Cincinnati. I was at the AAVSB conference delivering a keynote on how regulators are impacted by the work that they do in terms of their mental health. And then I got home Saturday night and my dog was just not feeling well. I ended up taking her to the ER on Sunday. She was hospitalized until yesterday. She had endoscopy yesterday. Um, she is having significant GI signs. And so I already had to interrupt a coaching call today to let her out. So I've let her out. I hope she's fully evacuated so that we can enjoy our time together today. But nevertheless, here we are. So, um, I am really excited to be able to share this launch with everybody. Thank you so much again for everybody's support. This has truly been an amazing experience. And I want to start by sharing the book. And I'm realizing I don't even have a copy it with me. So hang tight for a minute. I'm going to grab one. Hey, like I said, it's a little bit chaotic in my life at the moment. So forgive me for not being more organized, but here it is, hot off the press as of about a month or so now. And what I was hoping to do with all of you today is to introduce the book. I want to talk about how it's structured, the different sections, the chapters, the content that we cover. I also want to, of course, share where you can purchase it if you're interested, the different ways that you can purchase it and use it. And for those of you who have purchased the book, some different promotional items that you can get as well. And then I'm going to do a Q&A. I did thankfully receive a lot of questions ahead of time, so I've got some questions I'm going to go through. And then, of course, for anybody who is here joining us live or in the Zoom, you're welcome to share questions as well. I'll open up the Q&A here too so that I can see everybody. So that's the plan. And then I'm going to share what's next because there is a few exciting things on the horizon. So, like I say, this is the book. This is Vivian on the cover. And I know when we decided on the cover, it was really hard to choose a cover photo. And I remember putting it out on social media, and a lot of people were like, you're wearing a mask. Why are you wearing a mask? COVID is over. And, I did this big photo shoot with my photographer, and I was wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, different poses, different shots. And ultimately, this was the favorite one where Vivian, who is my dog, who was in the hospital and has been sick, but is resting quietly beside me. This is the one where I was smiling and she didn't look like, what's going on? She's a bit of a sensitive soul, my standard poodle. So it just turned out that it happened to be that I had a mask on, and I do still love this photo. I think there's other great photos too, but that was a lot having to sort out a photo for the book. Now, for those of you who don't yet have the book, it is divided into four sections and four parts, I guess. There's 40 chapters altogether. And the first section is on the journey of a veterinary critical care specialist. So this part is 8 chapters that I wrote about my journey in vet medicine. And so that includes my childhood growing up as a daughter of 2 veterinarian parents. It includes my path into vet school, my time in vet school, and then my decision to do an internship followed by a residency. And then I go into my time in academia at the Ontario Vet College. And then my departure from academia, which was of course a really tough decision for me, followed by my transition into mental health advocacy and well-being. So those are the first 8 chapters. Part 2 is what I learned about veterinary medicine along the way. And so in this one, I dig a little bit more into everything I learned in that journey. So the road to becoming a vet, all the different ways that people can earn their veterinary degree, whether it's, at your state or provincial school, whether it's out of state, whether it's out of country, and what that looks like. Then I talk about veterinary education's debt. So the rising amount of student debt that we're seeing among veterinarians, especially those in the US. The hidden curriculum in vet school was a fun chapter. I talk about meeting the demand for veterinary specialists, how there's been a challenge in meeting the mounting demand that pet owners have for seeking specialty care. Stories from the veterinary ICU, navigating euthanasia, ethical dilemmas and moral stress, the paradox of compassionate care. So that's one of my favorite chapters that talks about how we go into this profession because we love animals, we're compassionate people, and the compassion is also the same thing that can lead to a lot of the challenges. So there's that paradox that oftentimes our compassion can get us into trouble with our mental health and well-being. And then I talk about compliments, complaints, and client incivility. So talking a lot about that. And then I talk about toxicity in veterinary practices. So the fact that it's not just clients sometimes that can lead to challenges for us, but that it can be right within our teams as well. And then the burden of on-call, which is something I experienced as a faculty member. I was on call 50% of the time. It was exhausting. It's one of the big reasons I left the OVC. And as an emergency and critical care specialist, when I work critical care shifts, I am still on call. So that's something that continues to this day. Part 3 is what we now understand about veterinarians. So this is a lot more research. Well, all of the chapters have research in them, but this is more about veterinarians specifically. So once you get into practice, professional identity, playing the veterinary victim and martyr. So I talk about martyrdom and victim mentality in vet medicine. I talk about perfectionism, mistakes. That was a really heavy, heavy chapter to write. I share a story about a mistake that I made as a resident that resulted in the death of a patient and how that can impact us as veterinary professionals. Then I talk about mental health in the profession, recognizing stigma, compassion fatigue, burnout, boundaries, veterinarian suicide, and the pandemic and what happened with vet med during the pandemic. And then part 4 finally is what the future holds. So I talk about the rise in veterinary corporatization, insights into pet health insurance. We talk about technology, DEI, education, what the future holds for education, veterinary careers outside of clinical practice. That was a really fun chapter. I talk about the unsung heroes of vet medicine. Those are my veterinary technicians and nurses. Responding to the workforce crisis, which is definitely an issue here in Canada, and yeah, it's a bit more controversial in the US, but still an issue in many areas. Paving a path to self-care and self-compassion, and then finally reshaping veterinary culture to value team well-being. So there's a preface which kind of explains why I wrote the book, which I'll get into in just a minute. And then I know it's kind of hard to see with the camera. It's a little bit blurry, but each of these, you'll see that there's a lot of these did you know boxes. Yeah, it's too hard to see. So I've got lots of different did you know excerpts that share, different statistics that might be really surprising to people that come from research. And then there are a lot of references, and I keep those all at the back. I wanted to keep those separate from the book itself because I didn't want it to feel like a textbook. I really wanted it to be written, so that there was a broad audience that it could reach. So that is the book, and I remember my editor got it before I did, and she was like, "Ooh, it feels like weightier than I anticipated." I mean, it's 300 pages, and it's small writing, so it's a lot of work, it's a lot of writing, and I'm just so excited to share that with all of you. So it is available now. It was available for pre-sale in August, and as of August 22nd, it's been available. And so you can visit acompassionatecalling.com, and from there, there's multiple links for you to be able to purchase it. There is also a link on the website for those of you who have purchased it or plan to purchase it that you can also get a book plate. And once again, I should have grabbed my book plates to show you, but a book plate, I had no idea what this was. And one of my favorite authors, Gretchen Rubin, talks about like signed book plates all the time. And I was like, what is she talking about? I'm imagining like a plate on a book or a plate in the shape of a book. It's essentially a sticker that the author can sign and then mail to you so that if you have bought the book and you can't get the author to sign it, that you can ask for this book plate, they can sign it, and then it goes to you in the mail and you can put that in the book. So for those of you who want to gift the book to somebody and you want a personalized book plate for them, if you want one, happy to send those anywhere in the world. So please do. There's just a form you need to fill out online so that I can do that. And I have a limited number, so I'll do that while supplies last. There is also the option for bulk orders. So I get a discount for books. You can get a discount on books in quantities of 10 or more through the publisher. So I can arrange that for you. So if you want to buy copies for your practice or your organization, or if you're in a book club and you want to, get copies for everybody, I can help you do that at a lower price. So please do reach out to me. Additionally, there is on the website. If you go to the website under book club, there are questions that you can download for your book club. There's questions for veterinary professionals who are having a book club, and there's questions for pet owners who are doing a book club. So just to help to guide you through the content within the book. And I also created PDFs. So there's a PDF inspired by the book that is 10 things your veterinarian wishes you knew, and super happy for you to download those as well. I see a question. This is a great question, Meredith, and I didn't get this before. Will there be an audio version? Well, that was one of the things I was going to share is what's coming up. So yes, there will be an audio version, and that was like, let me tell you what went into that. So I always knew that I wanted to record the audiobook because I'm a speaker, I have my podcast, and it's just something I really wanted to do. I listen to audiobooks and I really like it when the audiobook is read by the author. And so we let the publisher know, my editor and I let the publisher know, hey, Marie is really keen to record the audio version of the book. Let us know how to do that. And what ends up happening is that the editor sells the rights to the audiobook to a company that produces audiobooks. So they sold the rights right away. But when we approached the company, they said, oh, no, like authors don't read their books. Like we have professionals that do that. And I was devastated. And my editor went to bat for me. She was so great. She was like, listen, Marie is a public speaker. She, she has a podcast. This is not somebody who doesn't know how to speak, although I feel like I can't speak right now. And she said, a lot of the book is very personal. It's my story. Like the entire part one is my story. And so it felt really weird to me, quite honestly, to have somebody else reading it. And Alice, my editor, just really emphasized that. Like a lot of these are personal stories, and it would just be great to have Marie be able to read them. So honestly, we must have exchanged like 10 emails. They were like, nope, sorry, we just don't allow that. And Alice had another veterinarian author, a good friend of mine, Sonia Olson, and Sonia had read her book. And so Alice tried to use that as precedent. She said, look, Sonia Olson recorded her book. Could Marie not do the same? And after multiple emails were exchanged trying to talk me out of it, they finally said, okay, Marie can audition to record the book. And so long story short, I submitted an audition tape. I've never done that before, reading my own book. I read, I think it was just one chapter or even half of a chapter, and submitted it. And I was like on pins and needles. And finally they told me that yes, I they had selected me to read the book. So initially they had said, you know, you're going to have to go to the States and it's going to be a week of recording and you're going to have to do that on your own dime. And now they have said that they can find a studio for me in Calgary, so much closer to home. And it probably will take several days, obviously, to record. I think they estimated it would be about 8 hours of total recording with multiple takes in terms of 8 hours for the finished product. So I'm excited for that. I don't know when it's going to happen. I've just signed the paperwork just to consent. I haven't even signed an agreement. We don't have a timeline in place, but hopefully within the next 6 to 12 months, there will be an audio version as well. So thank you so much for that question, Meredith. I'm going to answer some other questions now. I don't see anything else coming up in the Q&A. So like I said, I got a few questions ahead of time, and thank you everybody for submitting those. One of the first questions that I received, and have answered actually in subsequent interviews, is what inspired you to write A Compassionate Calling? And, you know, it's so funny. I have so many answers to this because I feel like this has been in my head now for probably 10 years plus. I remember one of my earliest memories of vet medicine was sitting in the office at my mom's companion animal practice and looking at all the books on the bookshelf. And, you know, there was anatomy books and surgery books and various textbooks. And then there was this whole shelf of James Herriot books. And I remember pulling them out, like they look like they would be children's books, like cartoon books based on the cover, but then there was all words inside. And I remember saying to my mom, like, what are these books? And she said, oh, those are, you know, books written by a veterinarian about being a veterinarian. And I was so confused because I knew that my mom was a vet and my dad was a vet and my dad worked for the government. So I didn't really saw what he did, but I saw what my mom did day in, day out. And that was working in companion animal practice. And yet I looked at the covers of all of these books by James Herriot, and they were, you know, men working with predominantly large animals. And it didn't quite fit to me. And yet, you know, despite that, watching my mom day in and day out and just loving what she did and loving my time in the clinic, I decided very early on that I wanted to become a vet. Well, fast forward to about, I don't know, 6 years ago, which was, I think, when the Merck Animal Health Veterinary Wellbeing study came out for the very first time. And one of the questions that was asked in that survey study was, how likely are you to recommend the profession to friends or family? And less than half of veterinarians said that they would recommend the profession. And I remember when that research came out, in particular that stat, and I was flabbergasted. You know, yes, I'd had my share of challenges practicing as a veterinarian for, 10, 15 years at that point in time, but I just love this profession so much. And I am so heartened to hear from friends, family, colleagues, children that they want to be a veterinarian. And so I couldn't believe it that this was not a sentiment that was held by everyone in our profession. And so that led me to really start digging into the research around that. And, as it turns out, the majority of people that hold that sentiment are relatively new graduate veterinarians. And so it kind of led me to suspect that new grads are getting into practice and it is not what they expect for some reason or another. And how do we bridge that disconnect, right? How do we get the information out there so that they know what to expect and that they can really prepare themselves for that in a positive way? Around the same time, I was noticing a shift in the way that we as a profession were regarding our clients. And I think this shift continues today. In fact, I think it is developed into a bit of a rift in some circumstances whereby we as veterinarians perceive that clients don't appreciate us. They think we're money hungry. They are, disrespectful of our time, of our expertise. And that clients sometimes can have the perception that veterinarians, jack up prices to make money and, won't help their pets when they're in dire need, if they can't pay, and, push them towards euthanasia in certain circumstances and things like that. And so I wanted to find a way as an advocate for mental health and well-being to bridge that gap between the veterinary practice team's experience and the perception of veterinary medicine on the part of the client. And so that's where I really wanted to write a book that would be of interest to both the pet owning population, people interested in vet medicine, people wanting to get into vet medicine, people training to be a veterinarian, all of those groups, in the hopes of really taking a deep dive into the challenges, the triumphs, the joys, the highs, the lows of our incredible profession. And with a really important spin on where do we want to take the profession from here? What's next? What are the obstacles? What are the challenges? And how do we overcome those? So, a very long-winded response to that question. The next question that I received, or one of the next question in my list, but one of the other questions that I received ahead of time, I love this question. How has your identity outside of vet medicine, as a mom, daughter, friend, etc., influenced you in writing this book? And, you'll see in the book that I dedicate the book to my parents. Both veterinarians, both in their own ways, inspired me to be a vet. And I dedicate it to my daughter because I don't even know when she realized I was a vet. And let's be honest, I am not like a traditional veterinarian that goes into practice every day. But at some point, I remember her saying to me, like, Mom, you're a vet. And I don't know if like somebody else knew I was a vet. They mentioned it to her. Nevertheless, ever since she's had that awareness, we've talked very openly about the work that I do and how much I love it. And there was a time when she was very young and I was traveling, when I got back into traveling after the pandemic subsided. And I remember saying to her, well, because she was like, I don't want you to travel, Mom, like don't go. And I was like, I have to travel because that's, it's how I make my money, is by speaking and doing shifts. And then I, after a few times saying that, I stopped myself and I was like, no, that's not why I'm traveling. I'm traveling because I love what I do. I love this profession. I love practicing. I love everything that we stand for as veterinary professionals. And I want to convey that. I don't want to convey that this is just a job, because it is more than a job. And that is part of the reason I named the book A Compassionate Calling, because it really to me has always felt like a calling. So how has it influenced me? In lots of different ways. I guess that's the biggest thing I would share in that regard. It's hard for me to separate my identity, let me rephrase. I have worked very hard to separate my identity from solely being a veterinarian to also being a mom, a daughter, a friend, a mentor, etc. And so I really try to bring my whole self into everything I do, and that included writing this book. One of the other questions that I received was, were there any stories or experiences that were particularly difficult or emotional to write about? The answer to that is a wholehearted yes. There was some things I wasn't really sure if I should write about, to be honest. There were some things I write about and I withheld a little bit of information. Without being too vague, I'll give some examples. So, probably the hardest thing for me to write about is something that I've talked much more openly about now compared to, 15 years ago when this happened, is the mistake that I made during my residency that resulted in the death of a little dog named Lacey. And I talked about Lacey again this weekend when I was lecturing to all of the regulators at the AAVSB. And every time I tell the story, it's gutting to me. And there is still some shame wrapped up in that. It's still embarrassing, a part of me, to really share that story. And I know that sharing that story has such power for normalizing mistakes in our profession and for getting the conversation out in the open as well in the context of pet owners. So that was probably one of the hardest things that I wrote about. There was some family things that I really wanted to be mindful of keeping private. My mom was in the public eye as a practice owner and veterinarian for more than 40 years. And she's one of the most private people I know. And so I wanted to be mindful when writing about our relationship, specifically around my decision not to go into practice with her. I wanted to convey that in a way that shared the contents of the story, but didn't create discomfort on the part of anybody else. And that goes as well for sharing some of my family's experiences with mental health challenges. Again, I am very open about my mental health and about the challenges that I've experienced and continue to experience. And I know not everybody else is right there with me. And so I want to be respectful of that. And the same goes for any of the stories. And most of the stories, are not shared naming names and identifying individuals. And yet I didn't want to have it be so that a person really recognized that they were named in the story or in the share, and that they really felt uncomfortable in being named that way. So I think that was the biggest thing that I really tried to be mindful of in that regard. The next question I have is, how long did the book writing process take, and how did you find the time? Did you have a professional book writing coach? I love this question too. Okay, I wrote the proposal for this book back in 2018. And I felt so strongly that this book should be written for the pet owning audience that I proposed the book to different book agents. I did a ton of research. I found agents that were interested in animal related books. I reached out to all the veterinary published authors that I knew and, was like, how did you get an agent? So there was a lot of networking and stuff involved at that time. And I received a handful of responses from agents, none of whom opted to pick the book up. Many of them at the time said that my social media following wasn't high enough to support, having a trade published book. And so I let it go. And I can't remember if it was 2019 or if the pandemic had already started, but I received an email from my editor asking me to review a textbook for a company called Taylor and Francis, which is a subsidiary of CRC Press, and which is an academic publisher. And I said, yeah, of course. I do reviews all the time, manuscript reviews, book reviews, all sorts of different things. And so I reviewed this textbook. And the last question in my review was, do you have an idea for a book? Or is there anything that's missing from the veterinary literature? And I said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. And I explain, it's written for it's meant to be written for pet owners, but this is my idea. And she got back to me right away and was like, send us your proposal. And so I did. And almost right away, they were like, we want to publish this book. Keep in mind, we're an academic publisher, meaning they mostly publish professional books, not like the books that you would typically find on Amazon or in Indigo or, regular bookstores, but textbooks. And I said, you know what? I am just so happy to work with a publisher. I always wanted to work with a publisher. I didn't want to self-publish. I mean, nothing against self-publishing. as somebody who has consistently written peer-reviewed content, I'm used to working with editors. I was an assistant editor for the Journal of Veterinary Emergency and Critical Care. I have co-edited a textbook, Manual of Veterinary Transfusion Medicine and Blood Banking. So I've worked with publishers. I like the collegiality of that and the oversight and the support. And so we signed the agreement. They gave me 3 years to write the book. I turned in the manuscript on time. And, there was a series of editing, and Alice was wonderful. I said to her, I really need like a pet owner's perspective on this book. And Alice was great. She read the book and she was like, we need to hear more about your dogs, like more personal stories about your own pets. Like people are going to want to hear that. So I added in some things about my pets, my standard poodles over the years. And one of my best friends from childhood, Leanne, also read the book. And she's a pet owner. She's obviously been going to vets for years. And she gave me a pet owning perspective as well. And it was just so valuable to me. So I really, really appreciated that. The time, how did I find the time? It was hard. As many of you know, I'm an entrepreneur. I have my own business. I'm self-employed. I'm a single mom. I'm newly engaged, but I have been raising my daughter alone by choice since 2020. And so life is very full, and it took a lot of discipline. I would carve out days in my schedule where I would only write. And because I had put together a book proposal, I had an outline for the book, and I really dug deep into that outline. I brainstormed, what are the stats that I want to share with this chapter? What are the stories that I want to share? And I would just get myself into creative headspace, which meant I wasn't working in my office. I would work in a different space in my house. If you go scroll back on my Instagram, you'll see that I posted on my writing days sometimes my workspace. So I was usually on my laptop, nothing else open, no other distractions, a notepad, to write things down, all of my papers up, and I would write. And I followed a schedule. I tried to work on one chapter a week. And then I would go back to the chapters. And anyways, it was a long process. It took the 3 years for sure to write it. And did I use a book writing coach? I didn't, but I did follow some book writing coaches. I did occasionally attend a webinar here and there on writing and tips and strategies. I signed up for a Udemy course on writing a memoir, and then I never took it. So I did it on my own. And I think part of that is because I'm a very disciplined individual. So when I put my mind to something, I can usually figure out a way to do it. But B, I guess I don't know what B was. I forgot it already. Yeah, disciplined, and the chapter outline, the structure. And and that's what I did. Great question. Again, everybody who's listening, watching, please feel welcome to ask more questions in the chat as well, or in the Q&A. So the next question that I have is, how did your background in emergency and critical care shape the stories and themes in the book? Well, I talk about my journey into emergency and critical care in the first part of the book. I talk about the cases that just like gripped me as an intern, how much I loved ER, the fact that I had an incredible mentor, Dr. Linda Martin, in my internship, who was a criticalist, who just, she was my mentor, and I just, she just helped me kind of get, along that path. And I still love it to this day. And so, yeah, I talk about it. I write about it. I still practice. For a year and a half, I was traveling to Seattle to practice for Veg ER for pets. And then I had to give it up because it was just too much travel. But I love it. I still talk about it. And it definitely weaves its way through the entirety of the book. Okay, another question. And I think I talk about this a little bit already, but the question is how do you balance honesty about challenges in vet medicine with keeping the tone encouraging and helpful? I hope that I did this. This is definitely something that I really wanted to do in every one of the chapters. Even the chapters related to mental health challenges, stigma, suicide. I really wanted to talk about the challenges, the stats, the truths that we are experiencing. It was very important for me for it to be evidence-based, so to present the literature and the studies, and to also present the initiatives and the projects and things that people are doing to help improve some of these circumstances. And I'm sure I missed a lot of initiatives that are ongoing. Hopefully that those will continue to increase as time goes on. But it was intentional for me in every chapter that it wasn't just going to harp on the bad, that there was going to be good things as well, or at least ending on a note of this is what we need to do to prevent this from persisting. When I think about the toxicity chapter, for example, these are things that we really need to address if we are going to be sustainable in the profession. So, and I really tried to not just have difficult topics in the book, but I wanted to talk about the joys, the highs, the wins, the amazing clients that we have, not just the challenging client experiences that we face. So that was really intentional, and it'll be subjective as to how people interpret it in terms of whether it was truly balanced or not. The next question I have is, what do you hope veterinary professionals gain from reading your book? This is really important to me, that I genuinely hope that veterinary professionals feel validated by what they've read. A lot of the feedback that I've gotten already from veterinary colleagues who have read the book is that they're just like, wow, like you put into words what I've been thinking or experiencing over the entirety of my career. I want there to be light bulb moments that people, that it sheds light on some things that maybe they weren't aware of or that they had experienced but they couldn't name. I want it to dismantle some of the myths that are circulating in veterinary medicine, particularly around veterinarian suicide. I think we can do better at some of the information that we share in that space. And I think it's appropriate for us to talk about that, especially now during the month of September, Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month. And most importantly, I hope it gives veterinary professionals hope that, yes, things feel really challenging right now, and we're growing into a profession that hopefully will be better than ever. And so that's my aim. The next question dovetails off of that, which is, what do you hope pet owners gain from reading your book? I hope that pet owners gain a better understanding of what it really means to be a veterinarian. I mean, that is the subtitle of this book. I think that for decades, there have been misconceptions, and there continue to be misconceptions. One of the first things that a pet owner asks me if they find out I'm a vet is, oh, where do you practice? They don't recognize that vets don't just practice, that they do tons of other things. They're helping develop your COVID vaccine. They're making sure that your meat is safe in the grocery store. They're preparing for the next pandemic, like all of these different things. And that we don't make millions of dollars. We're not all driving fancy cars and living in fancy houses. In fact, a lot of us have crippling student debt. And I think these topics are really important. I hope in sharing these topics, I'm not looking to blame or shame anybody, certainly not talking about some of the challenging client experiences that we go through, because I know every profession who is client facing has challenging client experience stories to share. I just hope that it creates an awareness and builds empathy for that which we experience as well. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who really like reading about other professions and other people's experiences. And so I hope that this particular narrative nonfiction book appeals to anybody who owns a pet, knows a vet, is interested in becoming a vet, and to give them that backstory. Maybe even the family members of people in vet medicine who just really never have fully understood what it is that we go through. My fiance is actually in the process of reading the book right now, and he's learning a lot about what it really means to be a veterinarian. The next question that I received this a little bit already. Are there any myths about veterinary life that you wanted to challenge in your book? And, I think the veterinary debt experience is a big one. And I've touched on that already. I do think that there is just this overlying general thought process from some, not from everybody, that, being a veterinarian is amazing, and we snuggle with puppies and kittens all day, and it's hard. And I find that more and more people who I connect with are like, yeah, like I'll bet that some of the work you do is really hard, particularly around euthanasia, which is really interesting because they'll find when they read the euthanasia chapter that euthanasia is not all bad. There are certainly some circumstances, I think, of mass depopulation and economic euthanasia or convenience euthanasia that are particularly devastating for veterinary teams. But when I think about euthanizing a pet that's lived a long and wonderful life that you've cared for the entirety of their life and their family's journey with that pet, and what a beautiful gift that is to give the family and the pet at the end of their life. We know based on research studies that euthanasia done well and with good communication with the family actually boosts well-being among veterinarians. So I think people will be surprised to read those things, and I'm excited to hear what the feedback is. The next question I have is, did you learn anything new about yourself during the writing process? I learned that I really love writing. I think I've always loved writing. I remember being an undergrad and getting feedback on my, research papers that they were like, "Wow, you're like a exceptional writer. Like this is, really well done." I can't say that I ever excelled in English. I didn't even like English when I was in high school, but when I got to university and it turned into more scientific writing, I really, really started to enjoy it. And I've had my blog now since I think 2016. So, coming up on 10 years of writing in more of a narrative capacity. I have my newsletters that I write. I really like it. And I learned that maybe I have another book in me. Maybe we'll have to see. My journey becoming a single mom by choice is something I'm very passionate about, and it's something I've often thought about writing about. My journey in my much more personal book, of course, in my personal life, my romantic life. Um, I think that was the biggest thing I learned, honestly, is just sometimes, honestly, I would read what I had wrote and I was like, whoa, like, did I write this? Like, that's really good. So that was fun. That was really fun. This is a really great question. How do you envision this book impacting the veterinary profession long term? And I like that profession because I hope that there is a long-term impact on the profession. I think that this is a particularly poignant time in vet medicine where we've come through the pandemic, which really fast-tracked a lot of technological change in the profession. It really highlighted some challenges within the profession around sufficient staffing, efficiencies, workflows, et cetera. And, now we're at this point where there's a lot of questions around meeting the demand for pet ownership, namely specialty care. Are we going to produce enough veterinarians? How are we training those veterinarians? What does the future hold? And so I feel like this really captures vet medicine to date, specifically focusing on the last 10 to 20 years. And where do we go from here? And so, I hope that this really sparks thought and conversation and change. Um, okay, this is a really good question as well. What advice would you give to someone considering writing a book about their professional experiences? It depends on the type of book they want to write. I've connected with a couple people who've reached out to me, colleagues, friends who have shared with me, I just signed a textbook deal with this publisher, or I just signed a book deal with that person. Book deal, an agreement to write a book. Most of us don't have book deals unless we're national best-selling authors. But which is wonderful. And I think some of these professional experiences are written in the format of a textbook where we really are looking to inform those in our profession about particular things. And I think that's amazing. And the biggest desire for me in those textbooks is that there is as much true evidence as possible, that we're not just like writing what we think to be true, but hopefully drawing as much from the literature as we can. And as a textbook editor myself, I think it's important to have a diverse set of voices amongst those authors. So having different authors edit the different write the different chapters, and that you edit those so that the general style of the textbook is the same or similar, but that there's, many different voices and perspectives that are invited. Individuals who are doing more writing like I did, which is a narrative nonfiction experience. So there's storytelling, there's, weaving things into it. The biggest advice I would give is to document your stories. Think already now about like what were the stories that really changed your life in your profession? Whether it was particular patients that you connected with, your personal stories, your life stories that intersected with that. People connect with stories. And in every single one of my chapters, I aim to include stories. They might be longer and more numerous in some chapters than others, but there's story in there that was really important to give something for the reader to connect with. And that's the advice that I would give. Okay. So the next question, the last question actually that I have, and I'm open to more questions in the Q&A or in the chat. How has the response to the book been so far, and what has surprised you the most? I love this question. So the response, I was just thinking the other day, I'm scared to look on Amazon to see if there are reviews. The response I've had, I would say, has probably been biased because it's been people who I know, largely who've purchased the book or who have been interviewing me. And so, we're connecting in that sense. I can think of one specialist who is the host of a podcast called it's called what? Oh my goodness, I feel terrible. It's Brittany who's the host, and I'm not going to be able to remember it exactly, but I think it's Your Vet Wants You to Know. And Brittany was given an advance copy of the book because she's interviewing me on the podcast. And we connected over Zoom recently in preparation for the interview. And she was just like, oh my God, like she's a veterinary dermatologist, so another specialist. And she is like, I was like taking notes and highlighting things, and I can't wait to ask you about these things. And I just loved it. So I think that veterinary professionals are really connecting with it. A lot of people who know me are reading the book. And so they're texting me like, oh my gosh, I never knew that happened while you were writing your boards. Or, I was at OVC the same time as you, or whatever it was. So I think there's that personal connection. I have not heard a lot from the masses yet, so I'm eager to hear that and terrified to look at reviews, to be honest. I might be a person, I know there's authors out there that never read their reviews. That could be me. I'm a sensitive soul, and honestly, it could put me into hibernation mode if the feedback is not positive. I will say from a media perspective, there has definitely been an interest in talking to me. And what has surprised me is that what I thought would be great stories for the media to cover, namely talking about suicide awareness and prevention during Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month. Oh, hi, Vivi. Vivi is coming to say hi. Um, or talking about mental health stigma among the general public and how it particularly impacts certain caregiving professionals. Talking about burnout among caregiving professionals, talking about potential veterinary shortages. Like there was definitely topics that I am so passionate about that I was really yearning to talk about. And what the media has really wanted to seem to focus on has been the rising cost of veterinary care. Or they wanted to ask me, ask the vet questions. And that surprised me. I thought, gosh, doesn't everybody want to know about the life behind veterinarians? And, at the end of the day, I think media, they want like the biggest and boldest headline. They want to be able to draw people in. So that has been surprising for me in terms of the ways that they've wanted to go. And a lot of people have commented on that. They're like, wow, they talked so much about the price of pet care, but they didn't really talk about your book much. And, for me at this point in the journey, I am just happy to be a face for vet medicine. I'm happy to advocate for veterinarians in whatever way that looks like, to be a spokesperson for the realities of what we are experiencing. And if that means demystifying some of the reasons behind the rising cost of veterinary care, I'm happy to do that. And I really hope at some point to be asked more in-depth questions about some of the other nuances that we experience. So I think that has been one of the biggest surprises. What's next? So I know we've got just a few minutes left, and again, happy to answer any lingering questions that are out there. So as many of you know, I was featured on CTV here in Canada, CTV's Your Morning in Toronto. So I flew to Toronto last week. I had the interview. It was the first time I'd been on live television. It was the most terrifying and invigorating experience that I have ever felt. After it was done, I was like, yes, that was so cool. But leading up to it, I was terrified. It was really, really fun. The host, Kelsey, was amazing. She did such a great job of putting me at ease. She's from Calgary, so we have that in common in terms of, I was living in Calgary for 11 years. So it was really, really fun. Since that time, there have been a couple of other news sources that have picked up the story and they have written articles. And so those articles I've featured on the website. If you go to compassionatecalling.com/press, or you go to the press tab, you'll be able to see some of those other articles. I will be on Your Morning Edmonton on October 3rd. So I'm really looking forward to that. So that'll be another opportunity to be there live in the studio to talk about the rising cost of pet care is what they want to talk about. So, okay, we will talk about that. And I have a whole bunch of podcast interviews coming up, which I'm really excited about. I'm going to do some book signings. So I'm going to be at the Pacific Northwest Veterinary Conference this weekend. I'm speaking all day Saturday, and Saturday morning I will be at Scribe Note's booth. Scribe Note is sponsoring my talk, and I'm going to be signing books and saying hi to everybody. So I'm excited about that. And then coming up in November at Indigo Chapters here in Edmonton, I will also be doing a book signing, and that'll be for the general public. So again, those events will be posted on the website under events, but really excited, open to other opportunities. So please share them my way. If you know of any opportunities or you think there would be anything else that might be of interest. I really, really, it was a goal of mine, and I haven't let this go, although I've stopped kind of poking the producers of these shows, but I had really wanted to get on some mental health focused podcasts. So I've always been a fan of Mayim Bialik, and she has Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. So reached out to be on the show, haven't heard back, and, a few other podcasts. just to give the perspective of, what veterinarians are experiencing and to shed light on that. So we'll see if anything comes to fruition with some of those more popular, more mainstream podcasts. For now, most of my podcasts are going to be on veterinary specific platforms or pet facing platforms. And I will also have a series of guest articles coming out in different magazines as well. So I'm excited for that. So lots to come. Again, if you don't have your copy yet and you want to purchase it, you can go to compassionatecalling.com. Please, you can reach out, sign the form, or complete the form for the book plate, and I'm happy to mail that to you. I know some of you, I've mailed you book plates already, and I'll probably at some point figure out a way to actually just sign the book, myself and then mail you the book. I just honestly, it's been so busy. I can't figure out the logistics and the, Canada Post and yeah. At some point, hopefully I will figure that out. Okay. I think that's it. Yeah. Thanks, Jamie, for getting all those websites up there. Oh, yeah. Good. You got the podcast your vet wants you to know. I love it. Happy to answer any other questions. I feel like that flew by. I had envisioned, having champagne and, having Vivian make a guest. Here, Vivi, you come here. Come here. Can you come up here? Hop. See if she can make a guest appearance. I don't know if you could see her. Here, I'll try and put my camera down. There's Vivi. Hey, I know it's kind of blurry. There she is. Still not feeling great after her trip to the vet, her hospitalization, but hopefully feeling better soon. Um, Anyways, this has been delightful. Thank you so much for those of you who are here live with me. It helps me to not feel so alone and in the void. I know there will be many of you watching the replay on YouTube, and I'm just so happy to talk about the book. And so if there's a question that you have about the book, about my journey, please reach out to me anytime. You can email me. My email address is email@marieholowaychuk.com, and super happy to answer any questions. And yeah, thank you all once again. Have a great rest of your days. Bye for now.